Hi, welcome to True Creeps, where the stories are true and the creeps are real. We'll cover stories from grotesque gore to the possibly plausible paranormal, to horrifying history, to tense and terrible true crime, and everything else that goes bump in the night. We're your hosts, Amanda,
and I'm Lindsey, and we want you to join us while we creep.
We cover mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, everyone. Happy spooky season. We're fully in it now, and I'm so excited.
Always. I mean, it is always spooky season all year round for us, but now everyone's here.
Yes, everyone's finally gotten on our level.
They've gotten the memo. They're ready for the next month or so.
Yes, yes. And this episode, I have been waiting for so long. Years
in the making. Love from the beginning.
I have been looking for a reason to finally give the Blair Witch her own episode, and today is that day.
She's deserved it, and you deserve it.
So, throughout the years, we've kind of developed our own story for the Blair Witch on our show. And if you don't remember, let me refresh this. She loves to travel. She travels everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
She has a pet snallygaster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's a better pet? She's friends with a bunch of cryptids, too.
Including the Jersey Devil. It's been a minute since I've Jersey Deviled.
It has.
We love her so much, by the way, that she was our fall card last year. Like, we did, like, her travel.
Yes.
Which was fun. I liked that a lot. That was neat. She's a lot more whimsical in our tellings of the story. Like, she's grown up. She's healed herself because hurt people. She gets it. She's moved forward. But that's not what we're talking about today.
No, but I'm glad. I'm so happy for her. But today, what we're going to talk about is what inspired the movie, what it may be based on, how the filming was absolutely insane, and what the actors in the movie are currently fighting for, which I didn't know a lot of this before researching, and I love the movie. So
yeah,
it's going to be a good time.
I cannot suggest enough a fresh rewatch after you've listened to today's episode.
Yes.
Because I think that you will appreciate it in a fully different way.
You truly will, for sure. So, quick recap of the movie and the marketing. And I'm hoping everyone has already seen this movie because it's been out for so long and it's amazing.
I mean, we're at 25 years. We're simply not giving spoiler alerts here.
No, we're not. So, it was released in 1999 and it was marketed as a true story. It was directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. The movie was created with a budget of only $60,000. Insane.
That's nothing.
Mike, Heather, and Josh, the three characters, head to Burkittsville, Maryland to make a documentary about the legend called the Blair Witch. It starts with pretty believable interviews with locals. Then they head to the woods to find an area they believed was tied to the mysterious death that was rumored to be caused by the Blair Witch. So the three end up finding themselves lost in the forest, and then they're trying to figure out what strange things are going on around them. Then it had a very memorable ending that caused a lot of audiences to absolutely lose it. Do you remember the first time you watched the movie?
I don't remember everything. I just remember also thinking it was true. I was also 12.
Yes.
It's important to note that.
Yes. We were kids when this came out, but it was the best.
Yeah, like, this was a formative movie experience for us.
Yes. It was also one of the first found footage movies, and many really believed that the characters were dead.
A lot of people think that this is the first found footage movie, but they are incorrect. The first found footage movie is Cannibal Holocaust from 1980. If you've already seen it, I'm so sorry. If you haven't, don't.
No.
Like, there's, like, real animal violence in it, like, that actually happened, and which is, like, and it's just super fucked up. It's numbing. It's so bad. Like, it's so gruesome. It's numbing.
Yeah, not our type of movie in any way, shape, or form.
No. Back to the Blair Witch, though. So, again, $60,000 budget. They kept the quality low, so it felt believable. And when we say they kept the quality low, in a bit we'll explain how they did that with relative ease. And so, not surprisingly, as we get into this more, the actors were not your typical actors. This role required so much more than standard acting gigs, and it put them in much more of a creator space than just an actor, right? Like they weren't just fed lines.
Mhm.
And we'll get into it, but wild. So the movie was considered pretty scary, even though you never see the witch, but everything about it is unknown, and the end leaves it without a resolution. And because there's so many gaps, your brain fills it in.
Yes.
And the blanks are always way worse when you fill them in yourself. And again, audiences genuinely believed that the information released about the movie, as well as the movie itself, were real.
Yes.
And we're going to talk a bit about how the creators of the film did that, how they got you to suspend disbelief, even if it was for a short time.
Right. They did a great job at that.
Yes, my 12-year-old brain thinks that it was stellar. I did ask my dad today. I was like, hey, when this came out, did you think it was real? He was like, no, it was bullshit. I knew it. And I was like, well, why did you think that? And he's like, because I could just tell. And I was like, did you watch the things that came out first and like look at that? And he was like, nope, didn't believe it. And so I was like, I wonder if it's my 12-year-old brain. I don't think so, because it wasn't just 12-year-olds watching this movie and believing it. It was lots of people. But in June of 1998, the official website for the movie was launched. On the website, they had police reports and news clippings that, while they were fake, did not appear to be fake.
Yeah, they looked very real.
And that is a trend you're going to see, is where there's these real artifacts that look real. They look like a thing that actually happened. And because they're convincing, people are passing them off as real. And on the website, they also had Heather's journal, biographies about the three characters, and a timeline. They also set up the idea that they themselves, like the film company, had been hired by Heather's mom to edit the footage. So it's not that this is a movie company who just randomly decided to make a movie and like, what are the odds that they have this footage? It's that one of the victims' mothers reached out for help.
Right. And I believe they alluded to it. I don't remember them actually saying that, but that's what everyone thought.
Yes. And we'll also talk in a second about what came out first that really solidified the idea that this wasn't a movie that was made. And another thing they did was that they didn't really market it that much. It was mostly spread by word of mouth, which made it seem more and more like something that was put together, not a movie that was set to make money.
Right.
And when it premiered at Sundance, they handed out flyers to the public asking people to contact the police if the missing actors were found. And the actors themselves were asked to keep a low profile, even though they attended the festival.
Mm-hmm.
And this helped create this environment of making it more believable. When they went to Sundance, they already had 10,000 people on their mailing list, which is a lot for that time.
Yes, it's before, people use the internet as much as we do today. So
yeah,
it was very new at the time.
And the actors' parents even reportedly got calls of people giving them their condolences because people thought their children were really missing. And part of the reason for this is because the actors used their real names. In a recent interview, Heather mentioned that she wishes that they hadn't used their real names and that their names became the intellectual property of the production company, which is wild.
Yes.
She actually ended up changing her name in 2020, and her name is now Ray Hance. As we're talking today, when we're talking about the movie and things that happened, we're going to call her Heather because that's the character's name.
Yes.
In the end, we'll talk about like where she is now and what she's doing. We'll call her Ray then because it's different parts of her life.
Yes. So after the midnight screening at Sundance, the director sold the film to Artisan Entertainment for $1.1 million. Now, Artisan is a subsidiary of Lionsgate. So we've heard of these two.
Yeah.
There's also videos of people's reactions leaving the theater from that night, and they're insane.
Yeah.
People are very upset and stressed and scared and like jittery, which is interesting because I haven't seen a movie that's done that to people in a very long time.
No.
The website got over 160 million hits by the end of 1999, and it is said to be the first movie to ever go viral before going viral was actually a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that when people were creating the internet and how people used it, they wanted people to all go to the same place at the same time. Like, actually, you kind of don't want that to happen a lot of the time because it'll like overflood a website. Like now when we think about it, it's a certain creator on a platform. So it's designed to be able to funnel people to one place. But that is not how the internet used to be set up. It used to be that if a lot of people went to a website, it would crash the website.
Yes. Yes.
Back in the olden days of the internet. Back on my AOL.
Thanks, Grandma.
That's a weird robot old man Borat.
Do you remember the little discs?
Oh, of course I remember. Of course. That terrible sound that it made when it would dial up.
Yes, yes. Anyways, so when the film went to Cannes, which is an international film festival, Artisan ran with the idea of the actors being missing. So what they did is they had their interns post missing persons flyers around the festival. Also, the actors were not allowed to attend the festival so that it wouldn't ruin, their whole thing that they were trying to make believable. A few weeks before its official release, they put out a mockumentary on Sci-Fi called Curse of the Blair Witch. And I don't think I saw that before this episode. Like, I just saw the movie and still thought it was real.
Yeah, I didn't either. I also don't know if I would have remembered seeing, like, something on television about it. I think that, like, I probably would have I just lumped in what I knew into one solid thing.
Yeah.
So, like, the information that you learn in that mockumentary versus what you learn in the actual movie, I made into one because I definitely knew some of that information. And it didn't come from the actual movie itself.
Right, right. So we did watch it just to like refresh or we must have seen it before. I don't know. But anyways, we rewatched it. It has interviews with people who talk about the legends of the Blair Witch and the history of what happened to make her what she is. There's also interviews with people who were close to Mike, Heather, and Josh. For instance, Josh's girlfriend, Lisa. She said that she had bad feelings about Heather and the pair fought about him going. Mike's brother, whose name is Tom, he talked about how upset his family was when he didn't come back. He said he was numb from the pain, which, like, it sounds so real.
Yeah.
Heather's best friend, Rachel, was also on it, and she mainly just talked about how she was missing her.
Yeah, and they were all very sad and very believable. They also very much had the sense of like a real person, because you know how when you're watching a fake interview with somebody, the person has like extra charisma. And when you're watching like victims, families, and friends, there's that kind of like dull ache.
Yeah.
That dull ache is there. So it's well done, in my opinion.
It is. It is.
So there's also an interview with Heather's film professor who said that she had submitted a proposal to do a documentary on a local legend, the Blair Witch. And so it's setting up why there's this footage.
Mm-hmm.
In the proposal, she says that she's going to spend the weekend in the particular park looking for evidence. But when he was going through it to approve it, he skimmed over that part. So he didn't see that she had said she was going to do that. And it wasn't until after she was missing that he noticed it was in there. There was also a woman who was involved with the search party who said that she urged the sheriff to remember what had happened there and why people said there was something evil in the woods, and that she should look to the past to figure out what's happening now. And that sheriff was also interviewed, and they had clips from local news programs. It absolutely should have triggered my like young brain, like, Lindsey, these are not the local newscasters from around you, right? Like, if they had actually gotten like the local news people from around here to do them, I think it would have convinced people in Maryland a little bit more.
Probably.
Because that also might be why my dad was like, absolutely not, because that person isn't a news anchor here.
That's fair. You guys live in the area.
Yeah.
I'm so far that I'm like, that's real. That's their anchors.
Yeah, but if people here were convinced, I feel like it would give more credibility elsewhere.
Yeah.
So the mockumentary has people who are listed as professors and historians talking about the legends and stories of the area that lead to the Blair Witch. And one of these legends is about a woman named Ellie Kedwick. Filmmakers would later say that this was an anagram for Edward Kelly, who's a famous occultist. And we've actually talked about him in our episodes where we talk about scrying. So Bela Lugosi's Mirror and our Bloody Mary episode. In the mockumentary, they also include historical records that show that a woman named Ellie Kedwick traveled from Ireland to Maryland in 1769. And they show pictures of like an old-timey record of like who was on a ship. And it looks, relatively real.
Mm-hmm.
So they also go into the legend about Ellie herself and say that she was banished from the town because children were accusing her of being a witch. And one of the reasons they were doing that was because apparently she was doing bloodletting on them because she thought that they were ill and that she was actually like a well-known healer in the area.
Sounds familiar.
They banished her from the town. Some stories say that they took her out into the woods in the middle of a particularly harsh winter, tied her to a tree, and left her to die. And that pretty soon after, those kids who accused her went missing. Then more children went missing until about half the town's children were missing. So everybody else was like, fuck this, and left. Like the whole town left. And at this point, allegedly, the town was named Blair Township. Years later, apparently, someone came across the town, abandoned, and convinced their friend, who happened to be a developer, who was named Burkett, to build a new town there. And that's why it's called Burkittsville. But Burkittsville has never been known as Blair Township.
No. All made up.
Mm-hmm.
In a very good way, though.
Yes.
It's very convincing.
Well, and then because they have people who look a little wacky, and they have people who look like just like a boring college professor, and because they mix them back and forth, it gives this weird level of credibility. Also, we've talked about pseudo-facts before in episodes about urban legends, and they do such a good job of using pseudo-facts in this.
They really do. Also in the mockumentary, there's a surprisingly realistic looking book from the early 1800s that is titled The Blair Witch Cult that has bizarre details. It talked about her ripping the head off of a child.
As one does.
Then dog teeth spring out of her calf for some reason. The anonymous writer said that she could control the trees.
Okay, sure. Why not?
What an interesting background.
A woman of so many talents. She's incredibly strong. She can talk to plants. She can have teeth come out of places where teeth should not be.
Right. The mockumentary also talks about a man who murdered 7 kids who lived in the woods. And it said that he murdered the 7 children because the old lady ghost told him to. His name was Rustin Parr. Filmmakers later said that this was an anagram for Rasputin. The scenes with him in jail were shot in the old jail in St. Augustine, Florida. There's a ton more about the lore surrounding it, so it's definitely worth a watch, especially if you're planning on rewatching the movie too. Mm-hmm. And after you learn what we're going to tell you about the movie, you're going to want to.
I think so.
But so all of this is leading up to the film being released, so this is what was on Sci-Fi. The marketing was so good that this movie was unbelievably successful. It was one of the most successful indie films of all time. Which is wild, because remember, very low budget. They didn't really expect this, and it just went crazy.
Yes.
It's also said to be the 36th or 37th, we've seen both, most profitable horror movie.
That's so many.
Which, like, that's a feat, because honestly, horror movies don't really do that well most of the time.
No. And when, again, we're going to talk about in a second, but like, when you think of the skill level required to make this, I think it's even more impressive.
Right. And like we said earlier, people thought it was real for a while. They actually thought that until the actors started to make talk show appearances. But even then, some people were like, that's part of a cover-up. They were hired to play the 3 missing people, which I thought was insane.
It is, but people are people.
Yes. And I mean, we were thinking about it, like, would this marketing work today? I don't believe so. I think because with how much we use the internet, it'd be too easy to run a background on Burkittsville, who's lived there, the stories there, and no, that didn't happen. When the movie was first released, just a silly story for my family, we went camping a few weeks after. And so we see this movie and then we go camping and we're like, we're going to die. When we woke up the next morning, there were rock piles outside our tent along with stick figures.
I mean, hilarious.
Like, I would totally do that now, but we were terrified. My mom finally admitted, like, oh, we did it. We just wanted to fuck with you guys. And we're like, great, thanks. So it became a joke whenever we do anything in the woods, which do exist in Arizona, Lindsey. They do.
Allegedly.
That we put the stick figures out. Like, that's just like our thing. And my mom even has a photo of my little brother when he was like 2 or 3 holding up a Blair Witch stick figure, smiling in the hallway. Like, that's one of the pictures that have been hanging in our hallway for like 20 years.
I love that so much. So I was a Girl Scout from like 5 to 18 through and through. And in the fall, we would typically go camping because it was just an easier time. Mm-hmm. And so the movie comes out in July of 1999. Fall comes. It is time to go camping. And we went to a treehouse camp, which is as cool as it sounds. It's fucking tree houses that you get to sleep in. It's super cool. It's still there. And okay, like, we're in the woods after Blair Witch. That is scary in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you add that we're in Maryland, and that makes it a little scarier.
Yeah.
And then you add that we are half a mile from the park where they were. Like, literally in walking distance. Like, they could have walked to this camp.
Yeah.
That's how close to this we were the same year.
Were you only thinking about the Blair Witch?
Oh, of course we were. We were like terrified because again, I was 12, which means that I was a junior in Girl Scouts. And I'm pretty sure that juniors are 9 to 12-year-olds. So a group of 9 to 12-year-olds aware of this happening in the world, camping right after this. I remember we went to Harper's Ferry, which was close. And on the way, we drove through Burkittsville and there were people selling the little like stick figurine things on their porches.
That's awesome.
And like, we stopped and bought some. But I remember being like actively like, oh no. But I just love that my mom was like, just a few months after the Blair Witch, no worries. Come on, children. Let's go into the witch
This
woods.
is where we're going.
Yeah.
I love that. In one of the many interviews and things that I was looking at this week, I saw a local person talking about like the Blair Witch phenomenon that happened after the movie in Burkittsville. And they were like, yeah, we were selling the sticks. One lady was like, I was selling the rocks from my front yard.
I love that for them.
Like,
make that
would
money.
Buy anything.
If you're going to have people come be annoying, at least make money off of them.
Right. And always be kind when you visit any of these places that we talk about.
Yes,
please,
always
because
respectful.
People are assholes and I hate it.
Yeah. Remember that people actually live there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the inspirations behind the Blair Witch. So co-director Daniel Myrick grew up around the woods and swamps of Florida, and he said, for a long time, I had this idea of seeing a stick figure hanging from a tree, and it creeped the hell out of me. So he ensured that this was worked into the story, and that's why you see the little stick figures all throughout the movie. Some people also think the Blair Witch lore may be inspired by the Bell Witch from Tennessee. We actually talked about her in our Bloody Mary episode. So if you're interested in learning more about her, you can head there. I liked that episode. That was a fun one. It's a while ago, but it was a fun one. The movie is also speculated to be based on the legend of Moll Dyer. So Moll was thought to have lived alone near Leonardtown, Maryland, and she was either from England or Ireland. We've seen different facts from different sources. So people in the area didn't know much about her, but she did enjoy the company of the indigenous people in the area. She was also believed to be a healer, and she did aid some of the community, which again kind of matches that Ellie story that we talked about.
Yes.
So in the winter of 1697, an epidemic of influenza swept the area. We've also seen in some versions that in addition to influenza, there was also a drought, and that the drought had started in 1695. So it's 2 years, it's a long time, and that the crops and livestock did not do well, which means that people are not eating well.
Right.
And that if you're not eating well, then you're probably more susceptible to illness. So it's all cyclical. So then there was also a super cold winter, and that made everything even worse. So because word of Moll being a healer went around the community, she was eventually accused of witchcraft. They blamed her for the bad luck the community had faced. So in February of 1698, a mob accused her of witchcraft and set fire to her cabin.
Not horrible.
Yes.
So she was able to escape into the woods. But remember, we said it was a very cold winter. That night was extremely cold. A few days later, a boy went into the woods because he was looking for a lost cow. He actually found her body, and she was positioned with one hand frozen to a large rock, and the other one was reaching towards the sky. In addition to that, one of her knees was on the rock as well. When her body was removed, her hand and knee left indentations on the rock. The legend says that she cursed both the land and the rock when she died. The rock's location was actually unknown for many years, but then in 1968, writer Philip H. Love read of her legend and went to search for the rock, which, like, what a thing to have to search for.
Yeah, you're like, I feel like a rock in the woods is comparable to a needle in a haystack.
For sure, yes. And he actually found it on the edge of a ravine. Still unsure of how he did it, but he did it.
Mm-hmm.
In the 70s, it was moved to the old jail museum in the town square of Leonardtown. Per the legend, the rock is imprinted with her hand and knees, even to this day. And remember, that's how the boy found her. People say that they feel dizzy, they've gotten sick, or they've had bad luck after touching the rock. Others have said that they can just feel the energy when they're near it.
It would make sense that if there was like some paranormal thing to it, that people would feel physically ill because it's something that people do feel when they're near some types of presences. So like that, It does make sense-ish.
Yes, yes. There was actually a dedication ceremony a couple years ago in 2021, and the mayor proclaimed February 26th, Moll Dyer Day. The rock was moved from the museum to Tudor Hall Manor, which is home to St. Mary's County Historical Society. There is now a protective cover and a platform that the rock sits on, and people often go and visit and even leave gifts for Moll.
I like that.
That's sweet. I mean, sucks what they did to her, though. Author and historian Lynn J. Bonvieri dove into the history of this legend in 2013. She was actually able to track down a Mary Dyer using county records, along with building family trees from people that said that they were related to her. So she was able to like find the connection and really go deep into these family trees to find her. Mary had 2 brothers, and she fit the timeline and the area. Also to note, Moll is a shortened version of the name Molly. And I didn't know this before, but Molly is a term of endearment for Mary. Did you know that?
I had never heard of that, ever.
Neither have I. I was like, is that like an old-timey thing or is that still a thing? And it comes up in searches, so okay. Oh. Before coming to the area, according to this historian, but again, I've seen 2, either England or Ireland, but before coming to the area, she fled the English Civil War to the West Indies. She was a poor indentured servant on a sugar plantation for 8 years there. And it's believed that she learned herbal medicine and magical traditions from the enslaved Africans who were working alongside her. So like they worked together a lot.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Then in 1677, she sailed to the Maryland colonies where our story originally started out. Today, some people have reported that Moll still haunts the area. And you can find her in the woods. And she's also been alongside the street that shares her name. And then I couldn't find anything why, but apparently there's also a white dog that people see in the area that causes traffic accidents late at night.
Okay, little white dog.
Right? Now knowing all of that, you can see how that is a very similar story to how the mockumentary said the Blair Witch started.
Yes, it really is. You can definitely see the parallel between the 2 stories. Now, getting back to the movie itself, let's talk about how intense the casting process was. So for the 20th anniversary of the movie, there was an interview that was done with the casting crew, and they shared the casting call in that. And it gives you a much different perspective of just what happened when this was being filmed. So the casting call said, quote, improvisational feature film. And it was an open call for the, quote, Black Hill Project. The shooting was from October to November for 3 weeks in Maryland. They were seeking women and men, 18 to 25, with a natural look. And we did see in a few different sources that they were likely going to hire 3 men, but then they met Heather and she gave this phenomenal interview/audition. In all caps on the casting call, it said, extremely challenging roles. And it also included that it would be shot under very difficult conditions. Now, when each of the actors came in for the audition, there was a flyer hung up that said, if you get this role, you will be subject to uncomfortable physical situations. You will never be in harm's way. You will be outdoors most of the time. If this is not your thing, please don't audition.
How intense.
Like, it's intense, but it's honest.
Yeah, they knew what they were walking into.
Well, yeah, and like if you're thinking like of actors as artists, you might have somebody who's just like not an outdoorsy person. So making sure that you have people who can do both is a good thing. So in their auditions, each person was given a scenario to act out. And the scenario was to plead their cases to be let out on parole. Interestingly, Heather's audition stood out because she was the only person that said she shouldn't be let out.
Yeah. And the way that they were talking about it, it was like, I shouldn't, I'll just do it again type thing that she was giving off.
I love it.
But that's awesome that she was the only one to like do it differently.
Yes. It is interesting that this is how they styled the audition, given how truly improvisational the movie itself was. Like they were truly getting a good sense of if they could do what was given to them.
Yes.
But anyway, once hired, the 3 actors were taught how to use the equipment and survival tools. The directors needed to make sure that they will be able to shoot on their own. They also wanted the actors to be as alone as possible. So a lot of what we see is just what they were able to learn with the equipment over a short period of time.
And there were little mishaps here and there. So like,
yeah,
makes sense because they learned it so quickly.
Yeah, it gives perspective as to why sometimes there's shaky cameras or if how certain scenes are shot. So the actors were also equipped with GPS that was programmed by the producers and directors that had mapped out all of the filming locations. They programmed what they called waypoints into 8 days, which was supposed to be how long they intended to film. At each waypoint station, they would find that it said like waypoint and then the number with the information about the next number and how far away it would be. But there were still several times where the actors ended up getting lost, which a solid chunk of that movie is them being lost and being angry about being lost or being angry about looking at a map.
Yeah, all that was real.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure.
Crazy. So at the beginning, the crew took them to a location, set them up to start filming on their own, and then would only speak to them if something was wrong or they had like an immediate question. Typically, they do this through walkie-talkies too. So it's not like they'd like come out of the woods and talk to them. It would be like, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
But what they found is with them being so close, they were often getting into the shots. And realistically, they didn't really need them to be directly right there because they couldn't do anything. They couldn't talk to them. All they could do was watch.
Yeah.
If they interrupted anything, so if they're like, no, do it this way, they would ruin the whole shot. So they couldn't do that either. So after they got in like a good groove of filming, the crew wasn't as involved because they knew what they were doing.
So what you're saying is that for a good chunk of the movie, it's 3 actors in the woods with their own equipment, shooting their own footage, working through it and asking questions here or there, but there's no set. There's no one like 10 feet away feeding lines into their ears.
Correct. Yes. We're going to talk about how they got a little bit of direction, but again, very hands off. In an interview with Eduardo Sanchez, one of the directors, he said at this point, they were just guiding them through the directing notes and making sure that everything was going according to plan. Heather, when she first got hired and like was like, okay, I really have to go camping with these 2 guys, she started to get a little nervous. And she allegedly brought a knife just in case it ended up actually being a snuff film.
I think that's fair. I also think that is a big difference between how this would be handled today, is that today there would be other people around within a certain period of time, and they would have like marked off areas where they shouldn't show the camera or something. Like they would solve for this. I don't think they would just leave them out there.
Right. So filming, as you can imagine, was pretty difficult. The dialogue was all improvised. All that they were given were little prompts and like short notes for the day. If they had to break character for any reason, they used their safe word, which was taco.
I love it.
When they would arrive at an area that they were supposed to camp in, they would find a milk crate marked with a bicycle flag. And we believe that the crew had also set their tent up, so they had kind of a set, but again, it was just a tent. Inside the milk crate, they would find tiny film canisters that they would each open up with individual directing notes. And they were told to only read their note. They were not allowed to tell each other about their notes, and they weren't allowed to read each other's notes. So each one was labeled with their name. That was the only thing they were allowed to read. The crate also held food and water, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So, of course, this movie gave the actors a lot of creative freedom, and they got to do as many takes as they needed to and try out a bunch of different options until they were satisfied with what they had performed, which is kind of cool. Like, it gave them a lot more.
Yeah. So there's a lot of autonomy there and a lot of ability to direct the creative process in a way that most people are not doing when they're not the director as well as an actor.
Exactly. And thinking about it, like if other people had been cast, this movie could be wildly different.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the success of this movie absolutely hinges on the 3 actors, but for their skill.
And I mean, the directors had the idea originally, you know, and they were giving them prompts. So like, I think them as a team, but they did a lot. They did a lot of the heavy lifting for sure.
When you're thinking of the marketing and creating the lore and all of these things, there is no world in which I don't have like the utmost respect for the filmmakers. However, I do just want to point out that when you're looking at copyright law, which I feel like is a good standard to look at like who's in charge of what in the creative process, you can copyright the expression of an idea, but you can't copyright an idea, which is why superheroes, the just general concept, couldn't be copyrighted, but you could copyright Superman, for example. So here, their expression of the idea given to them by the directors is wholly unique.
Yes.
And made by them. So I do think that that's a bit interesting that like they are so thoroughly part of the creative process in a way that they are not given credit for.
Yes, exactly. Each night, the directors would review the footage and decide how they wanted things to progress the next day. So the notes that the actors would receive would reflect that. For example, one note said something like, "You're sick of following Heather around, and she doesn't know what she's doing." And so that's how the actor would act that day.
I also just like remember that particular example because when you go and watch it again, you'll be able to point out like, oh, this is the point when you were just fucking fed up with it.
Yes.
Amazing. So this part cracks me up, but a lot of the filming took place in a day use park Seneca Creek State Park. And so sometimes the actors would need to work around normal hikers and families who were walking around. And Heather even said in an interview that they looked ridiculous because they're in this like, you know, casual park and they have like these massive backpacks and people are like, I'm on a picnic with my family. And they're just like unnecessarily outfitted. But it is a huge area, like 6,300 acres, huge area. And conditions weren't great. They were really camping.
Right. And I think I talked about this a few episodes ago. Like, I went camping a couple months ago, right before we went to Villisca. And like, we were supposed to stay 2 nights. I was like, one's good. I'm not a camping person. It's too hard.
I mean, I easily haven't been camping in at least 15 years. And I don't know that I have the desire to.
It's hard. It's messy. Not my favorite.
Yeah. So the tension and arguments were real between the actors. If you remember, one day, by the way, Josh just disappears. And originally, that was supposed to be Mike. But after watching the daily recordings and the way that they were interacting with one another, the directors changed it. So the filmmakers had left him a note in his little film canister saying, wait for everyone to fall asleep, then sneak out of the tent. If someone wakes up, just tell them you have to pee, and then just head out quickly. So he sneaks out, and when he does, the crew members are waiting for him. They put him in a car, and they're like, okay, you're going home.
Yeah, he had no idea.
Yeah. And the bundle of sticks that they found, by the way, actually had real teeth in it. They were able to get those from a dentist. And I just really want to point out that I don't like the idea that my dentist just gets to do whatever they want with teeth they remove from me. Like, because it's probably not the dentist's own teeth, you know? Like, whose teeth are those?
I don't know.
I don't like it. So, in an interview with Daniel Myrick, the other director that we mentioned earlier, he said that the 8-day camping shoot was designed to push them and to elicit genuine responses from them. And I think it did.
Yes, for sure. So during the filming, they actually rationed back their food so the actors would be more hungry. He made sure to mention that they absolutely were not starving them, but gave them enough to make them irritable.
Okay.
Which, like, still seems kind of shitty, but okay. Michael gave an example. He's like, for instance, one day for lunch, we would get a sandwich and a bag of chips. Then the next day, it would be just a sandwich. Then the next day, it would just be a bag of chips. And then maybe the next day, there wasn't even lunch at all. The last few days, there was enough to sustain, but not a lot of food. I saw in some places that maybe it was like granola bars and that sort of thing. But they never limited water, just to put that out there. The actors knew it was going to happen. Like, they did say, we are going to do this. But they said it still sucked.
Yeah.
Like, especially camping, like, it's hard. And carrying the backpacks and doing things. Something one of the producers, named Greg, told the actors was something like, your safety is our primary concern, but your comfort is not.
Okay.
He got real with them, but
yeah.
I have no desire to do what they did. Zero. At one point near the end of the movie, one of them is eating a dead leaf.
Made me like literally chuckle out loud.
Yeah, and now we know why.
Because Heather says like, are you eating a dead leaf right now? And they're just like chomping. Just like, I'm hungry, babe. Like, please, let me live. The idea of your safety is our concern, but your comfort is not, really makes me think of contemporary reality TV shows like Survivor, where if you watch a season, over the course of the season, people become emaciated, where like they're playing for food. And it's just like an uncomfortable thing. And that part of the entire purpose of the show is the relationships and interpersonal drama that exists as a result of the situation.
Yeah, it's very similar. Additionally, in the movie, creepy stuff tends to happen at night while they're in their tent.
Of course.
The people doing the creepy stuff actually was the crew scaring the actors. And the crew sometimes wouldn't even get to leave until like 2 or 3 a.m. because they'd be running around and making creepy noises to help the actors know what to do. The actors, luckily, at least in an interview, I don't buy all of this, but in one of the interviews, they said they weren't normally scared. But again, like, how could you not be in the middle of the woods? And they didn't always know when it was coming. They just knew something would come, but they didn't know what it would be. But the actors said usually they weren't scared because they knew something was going to happen. They did say that it was kind of cool, though, because they knew it was the crew, but the crew was out of their minds because they never see them. So they got to focus on the sounds and act with it like it was actually happening because they couldn't see what the crew was going to do or what they were doing or how the noises were being made.
That is kind of neat.
At one point, there's children even. So like, scary.
Oh, I don't like that part. That freaks me out. I would also imagine that like when you're asleep and being woken up from something, you're likely to have a more genuine response to whatever the stimuli is. if you're an actor.
Right, right. And one of the guys had said after a few nights of this, though, they were mostly just annoyed because they had usually just fallen asleep.
Of course.
And then they had to get up and start acting again, right? Like they didn't have time off. Josh mentioned that they were usually exhausted and hungry by this point, and that stuff like their sleeping bags would often be damp or wet, especially from like hiking through things.
Yeah.
So it would take a while to fall asleep because you're uncomfortable. But then once you fell asleep, all the shit would happen and then you'd have to get back up. So I did feel for them, and like, I respect that movie so much more.
Oh, yeah. I am just so impressed with the actors in this, knowing this.
Yeah.
It's also, I mean, I think pretty cool that you could just have those director's notes and be like, this is how we want the story to go.
Mm-hmm.
And like figuring out like the sweet spot between enough direction and not too much. I think that would also be like a difficult thing to do.
For sure. Yeah. And so, yeah, thinking about the creepy things at night, they didn't know when it was going to happen. They didn't know what was happening, and they didn't know what was actually making the noises sometimes. So even with warning, I think I would be very freaked out. Knowing it's coming, you're still like the anticipation and yeah, being woken up very quickly. Don't love it.
Also, not having the certainty of whether this is real or not, there has to be some part of your brain that goes, what if it's not them?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just for a fun fact, when I brought up the children that they heard outside their tent, it was a recording of kids playing outside one of the director's mom's houses.
I love that.
And that recording is the one that was said to have scared Michael the most during filming. And that would scare the hell out of me hearing that in the forest.
It's the most unexpected. And I feel like you could genuinely have a feeling of, what if we're wrong?
Mm-hmm.
What if a lot of the stuff we're experiencing is this thing?
Mm-hmm.
So the iconic scene of them running from their tent was actually shot multiple times because something kept going wrong with the camera. And when Heather screams, what the fuck is that? She actually saw the art director, Ricardo Moreno, dressed in random stuff. So she was like genuinely like, what the fuck is this? But we've seen from varied sources that he had a white stocking with white pantyhose over his head and then just bandages all over him, and that he was just running alongside them kind of as a prank. And that's the take that actually made it into the movie. So they shot this scene of them coming out of the tent several times, and then he's like, I'm just gonna fuck with you, and that's the scene that actually made it in.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah, and I guess I've seen differing accounts, like what he was wearing. Some were like the stockings, some were saying just bandages, but apparently what they were supposed to do is aim the camera towards it because he was off in the distance, like this white thing that you really wouldn't be able to make out. But they were actually scared, so they didn't do it the right way. But the scene was so good that they kept it in, and that's what they used.
Fair. So while they were filming at one of the locations, the actors arrived in the rain and their tent had completely flooded. They tried to contact the directors, but couldn't get a signal with the walkie-talkie that they had been given. Luckily, they had escape routes programmed into that GPS they were given in the beginning. And so that took them to a local person's house, and they allowed them to use the phone where they could call the directors. They then picked them up and let them sleep in a motel for the night. Now, the end of the movie was very tricky to film. And when I think of Blair Witch, I really do think of this scene, the scene of Heather and her monologue. And it is iconic. There's been so many parodies and so many sketches that included elements of it. I remember like seeing ones where they had like boogers coming out of the person's nose and it was like grotesque. So this scene, while not scripted, it was one of the more curated scenes, if you will. And so while they had a relative idea of what they wanted her to say, she was able to improv it. So how they described how to create that scene was that she got to say goodbye to her family and apologize like if she was on a boat in the middle of the ocean and had insisted they go in a certain direction while everyone else said no, and now she was sinking. So a horrific situation where she's to blame and she's apologizing, right? Okay, interesting. And they asked her, like, what would you say in this moment? So if you're thinking of this image, it's half of her face. It's like her nose-ish area up. You don't really see so much of her mouth. I don't think you see her mouth at all, right? You just see like the top of half of her head. It very much looks like a selfie of a person who doesn't understand how cameras work today. And part of that is because, again, she was learning how to use these cameras before they went. So she didn't realize that it was zoomed in on her face. She had never meant to shoot it that way. She thought she had her entire face. Now imagine today being able to look at yourself in the phone. What a wildly different thing it would be. But in a recent interview, she said that was the part that she knew she nailed because she was one of the first people to really ugly cry on camera.
I love the way she said that. She's like, no one ugly cries on camera. They do this cute cry. I ugly cried. Like, you saw everything.
Well, and on the rewatch, I was able to appreciate how much of an artist she was in terms of that. Because if you're thinking of cry acting, like, you're not always actually crying. Sometimes you're just mimicking your like what your face does when you cry, you know? But she is like genuine tears are coming out of her face and her monologue is believable and it's raw. And so I just had so much more like respect for like what she did. Just wild.
Right. And like, I wish I would have found out more about this earlier. Like I love the movie already, but like I would have appreciated it so much more.
Yeah.
So the end of the movie was filmed at what's called the Griggs House, which is a historic home from the 19th century that was abandoned. It's also our episode art for today, so if you want to take a look at it. They filmed that final scene on Halloween night in 1997. Fitting.
Love it.
The house was covered in graffiti, though, so they had to paint it before they shot. Also, if you remember the movie, there's a bunch of handprints everywhere inside the house. A crew member brought their nephews and had them dip their hands in paint and run around the house.
How fun.
Right? So interesting. It makes it so, like, you think about it, that's a scary look. And you're like, oh, it was just kids having the time of their life.
Yeah, they were just having a hoot.
And then the way that they had Josh yelling is they had a boombox with a cassette that they had the recording of Josh yelling, and they played it to get the other two's attention.
I like that it wasn't even Josh. It was just a recording. Because, like, why have him out there?
Yeah, I believe I saw somewhere it was, like, the night that he left. They're like, oh, we need you to scream this nonsense. And he's
Makes
like,
sense.
okay. And they're like, okay, goodbye, go home. So, going back to the final scenes, the part of them finding the house was actually genuine. Because the actors had never seen the house before, nor did they know that they were going to find a house. All they knew is that they were going to be driven to a location, and that would be like where they were going to shoot, right? When they found out that they were going to be driven to a new location to film, the crew told the actors, please do not talk to each other in the car. Just sit. So they sat in silence on the way to their new filming area. When they arrived, their tent was set up, and then they started filming like before, right? And this was all before seeing the house. So they saw their little campsite. They thought it was just another campsite. The directions that they gave Michael were super vague. They told him that during the night, he was going to hear something, which ended up being the boombox with Josh's voice, and that he would need to follow it, quote, all the way up until Heather reaches him. And then when she does, run all the way down. And he's like, what the fuck does that mean? Right? Like, what does that mean? Run all the way up, run down. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And they were like, you'll figure it out. They wouldn't answer his question. They just denied everything because they wanted his honest reaction of finding the house.
And also his unknowing what they meant probably meant that he moved with more trepidation. Like, he kind of like explored in a way that was different than like, I'm just following a voice.
Yeah. So then he goes to sleep and he wakes up to Josh's voice and follows it to what ends up being the house. So he's like, oh, that's when it finally made sense. Like, oh, go upstairs and downstairs. But like for a while, he's like, I don't know what they want me to do. I'm just going to try to figure it out. The end scene was actually a bunch of takes that they cut together to make it look like it was a continuous take. There are also alternate endings, and they're all on YouTube. I watched them last night, and I think they went with the best. But when Mike gets downstairs, to my knowledge, they didn't know this, but 2 crew members were dressed in all black. They grabbed him, and then they threw him in that corner. So, like, imagine going downstairs and getting grabbed. Like, how scary. When Heather came downstairs, the crew did the same thing to her, but carefully knocked the camera over. So that's that scene where you see the camera fall. Heather, though, was so scared that she was hyperventilating.
Oh,
I felt so bad hearing that.
yeah.
This is ridiculous. But after they filmed that scene and they were done, the crew took the 2 actors out to Denny's.
I hope they got a moons over my hammy.
So do I.
Now I want a moons over my hammy.
Me too.
Brought to you by Denny's. Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be.
Anyway, so they do this amazing acting, but then the directors look at the footage and they didn't have the audio for the final scene. So they had to go back the next day. And they actually went back again afterwards to shoot more endings, thinking that the original wasn't scary enough, but then just ended up going with the first one after all.
Yeah, I believe that was after one of the film festivals. They were like, okay, let's redo this. But again, they're like, the original was better.
So remember how we said it was super low budget? Supposedly, one of the cameras was returned to a Circuit City for a refund after the filming, and the other was sold on eBay for about $10,000.
That's insane.
So they're like, we can't even afford to keep this camera.
I love that it was Circuit City, though, because that was like my first big job that I had. And that's also where I met my husband.
Romantic. So after these several days of shooting, they have 18 hours of footage. And that's not even including the documentary footage and the interviews. So after reviewing the footage, the editors realized that they had the entire story with just the found footage. So the actors did such a good job telling the story and explaining everything that they didn't need anything else, really, to explain what was going on. And given that this is not necessarily what they had planned for, the actors weren't paid appropriately for how well the movie did. Because the contract that they signed in the beginning wasn't for this. It was for a different concept. And so in an interview, Heather even mentioned having her car break down next to a billboard with her face on it. And she was working a temp job at the time.
That made my heart so sad.
I know.
That, like, she's a big star to everyone, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is crazy. And she doesn't even have a car that's working.
It makes me think of Olympians as well, who are like,
yes,
who have like day jobs, multiple jobs, but like everyone in the country is cheering for them. Like it's wild.
yes.
But Josh and Michael were still working their jobs too. They moved furniture and served food. And this part pisses me off. At one point, Josh even had to serve food to his agent at a catering job just days before he had his interview on the Tonight Show. So like he's that level of famous, but he's having to like do catering gigs. They even paid for their own travel and lodging when the film originally made it to Sundance, which in every other film, you want the stars of it there and present and everywhere. But I don't think the film company really did, right? Because it changed the movie if they're fine. But anyway, Haxon, the production company, only helped with the last 2 days of the festival and put them in a lodge that they had already rented.
It was like an after the fact thing.
Yeah.
Which pissed me off.
Yeah, they're like, I guess if you're here. And as the movie is becoming more and more successful, they're like, we're going to get recognized and we'll make good money. They're like, it's going to pan out. They didn't expect this. Of course, they're going to compensate us.
Right.
When the movie passed $100 million, the actors were sent a fucking fruit basket. Ugh.
I had to read it multiple times when I saw that because I was like, what the actual fuck?
That better have been like a fucking gold dipped edible arrangement.
With money at the bottom.
With money at the bottom. Gold bars at the bottom even. And once they got that fucking fruit basket, that's when they were like, oh, we're not going to get anything more. This is a like pat on the head. Like, thanks. Okay, bye.
My heart hurt for them.
Fucking right. So when they originally signed on to the project, they were told to sign a 1.5-page deal memo. And there was a clause that said, should the project net over 1 million, the actors were entitled to a 1% participation in profits in excess of that 1 million. Because it was a small indie film. They were like, it's not going to make that much money.
Yeah, they didn't even think that that would happen.
Yeah.
They were just excited to get a job that was paying. And where they could put it in like a resume to get more jobs later.
Yeah, it helped them do other things.
Also, they didn't really pay attention to the clause that allowed them to use their real names. They had thought originally that their names were going to be Jane, Bill, and John. The filmmakers then said it would be more authentic if they used their real names. So before the major change in the movie, so remember, originally it was going to be a little more to it other than just the found footage. But before they made that change, the actors were told that the footage that they were going to shoot would make up roughly 10 minutes of a fictional documentary about the characters' purported disappearances. So they didn't think they were even going to be in the movie that long.
Yeah, of course they couldn't negotiate because they thought they were 10 minutes of screen time total for the three of them.
Exactly. Could you imagine though? Yeah, you're supposed to be in it for 10 minutes and then you are actually the entire movie once you do your part because you were so fucking good at it. Finally, when the actors no longer had to pretend to be dead, they were able to book interviews and they finally did make some money. In one of the interviews, I thought this was so sad, but I'm glad she like put it out there. Heather mentioned that she was the poorest famous person in America right now. And then immediately she gets a call from Artisan and they're like, you can't say that.
Just get fucked. Just get so thoroughly fucked. Like, ugh.
Right. By the summer of 99, they received a performance bump, but it was still in the low 5 figures. So it still wasn't like what they should have been entitled to.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, because they used their real names, casting directors thought they were just playing themselves in the film. So they weren't getting jobs. Casting directors are like, you're good at playing yourself, but like, I haven't seen you play other things.
I also just don't understand how they would think that because like, it's not real.
Right.
What did you think was happening?
Exactly. Yeah. So from what I understand, they thought, oh, they just gave them cameras and they just acted like themselves the whole time, but with a movie happening, that they didn't like give their characters a difference from their personal lives. And I was like,
weird.
That's not what happened.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, casting people were like, I don't know what they can do. They don't have range.
Oh my gosh, do they have range?
Yeah. So they couldn't get other acting jobs, which really sucks. When the sequel came out, the actors sued Artisan because it used their stuff in the film. I don't think that they were obviously actors in it, but they used the original story to tell the next story, which was terrible, by the way. It was awful.
Yeah.
About 4 years later, they were able to reach a settlement for about $300,000 each, and that would be paid to each individual actor, but over several years. So they couldn't even like give them their big lump of money. It was like, we'll pay you over years.
Yeah, when they got their money.
So as part of the settlement, Artisan couldn't use their names or images to make money. But according to an interview with Heather, they're still doing it anyways. There was a lot of merch sold. I don't know if you've seen it. Like when I was looking the other night, there were action figures, comic books, all kinds of stuff published. And they weren't making anything, even though it looked like them. And just to note, the New York Times reported that Haxan and its investors likely earned anywhere from $35 million to $40 million from the original film.
That's a lot of fucking money.
Then something happened just this year that completely blindsided the actors. In April, Lionsgate revealed at CinemaCon that they were going to reboot the Blair Witch Project with Blumhouse.
Okay, pause. Amanda, what are your thoughts on Blumhouse movies?
They're hit or miss for me. Like, I love some of them, and then other ones I'm like, what?
Yes, I feel like Blumhouse. Okay, so you know how some brands have like their normal brand, and then they have a brand that they like give to like Costco? Blumhouse will do that. They have some great movies, but they had a series of movies that they made in conjunction, like partnership, whatever, with Hulu. And those were like not the same quality. Like it was, I was like, oh, this is a Blumhouse movie. Like I generally like their movies. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I'm like, okay, that was an anomaly. So I watch another one and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And like rinse and repeat. And so now I'm like, ugh. Which like for me, horror movies have to be excellent or very bad.
Yes.
I actually prefer bad horror movies to good horror movies. Like it brings me a lot more joy. And the in the between though is no, I don't like that. So can you imagine them like struggling for so many years? Yeah.
And then they're just like, we're going to reboot it. They didn't talk to them. They didn't know what was going to happen. They were just as surprised as everyone.
Well, and also people like when the old version people are in the new version.
Yeah.
And because of like the format of this particular movie, there's such an opportunity to have the original cast in it playing different characters.
For sure. Yeah. That would have been great.
People would have loved that. They still should do that.
If they can figure it out. But the goal in like revamping the movie is they're intending to reintroduce the horror classic to the new generation. Which like before I knew all this, I was like, oh, that's cool. But now I'm like, fuck them.
I mean, provided that people are compensated appropriately. I love the idea of it. But the problem is that the Blair Witch concept wasn't just a found footage movie. It was like in the zeitgeist. It made sense. Like people were starting to look at websites. People were not questioning facts on the internet quite so much. People were a little bit, I mean, people are pretty gullible now, but the world was a different place. So this was able to exist as like fiction and nonfiction for this period of time, and that made it scarier. And I don't think they can do that again unless they are going to start with a whole ass new concept that's completely different and start from scratch and not tell anybody that they're doing it.
Yeah.
You can't be like, we're doing the Blair Witch again. Everything's real this time. Like, fool me once.
Right. Well, and like you mentioned at the beginning, this is the 25th anniversary. So earlier this year, all the actors were kind of celebrating because they were being invited to conventions and they were meeting fans again. And like they've been great with fans from what I've seen. Like they know that it's not their fault, right?
Yeah.
That the companies fucked them over, but they were very excited getting all that attention and like kind words and people going to these conventions and just telling them the greatest stories. I saw one on, I think it was Michael's Instagram the other night. And I was like, this made me so sad.
I know which one you're talking about with the tattoo.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
Like you hear people talking about how important the movie was to them, because the thing about any type of pop culture media is that when you encounter a piece of art that someone has created, you accept it into your life as you are in that moment. So, for example, Amanda, what is the show that you watched when you were pregnant with Ollie?
I watched Buffy and Angel.
Exactly. So when you think of Buffy, you think of that period of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people do that with things, and they become more than just the story of that, but a reminder of how you felt in that time.
Same with music.
Yeah, same with music. And so even movies that are like dark and scary and spooky can have this like warm, fuzzy, nostalgic feeling because you're remembering who you were at that time.
Yes.
So I think that it is lovely that they're getting to see that.
Yes. So again, earlier this year, they're celebrating, they're having fun with their fans, they're doing interviews, all kinds of stuff. And then that's when CinemaCon happened and they were like, we're redoing the Blair Witch. And that kind of like,
You thought you were going to have joy? No.
yeah, it kind of made their like feelings fall a bit because they're having a good time and then this happens. So made me really sad. The actors recently released an open letter to Lionsgate. And the first time I saw it, Josh had shared it on Facebook, but it's all over all of their socials now. But what he said I thought was interesting. Like I like the way he said it. But he said, we're now adults, quote, with far fewer fucks to give when it comes to speaking up for our own rights and the rights of other artists who are being put in similar, compromised, extractive positions by a dehumanizing system.
Yeah. So well fucking said. And so in this open letter, they asked for 3 things. The first was retroactive and future residual payments for the movie, equivalent to the sum that would have been allotted to them through SAG-AFTRA had they had proper union or legal representation at that time. Which wild. And also, when you're thinking of these SAG-AFTRA like negotiations, these now include things like, what happens if there's clips in this movie used in a future movie?
Yes.
How much do you pay people for it being used on streaming services? Because people don't buy movies anymore. Okay, they sell merch. How much money do you get? How much money do you get when they use your fucking face? All of those things are contemplated in those types of negotiations and contracts, and that never happened for them.
No, and they were young.
They were
new actors. They didn't know.
Yes, and they didn't even get the benefit of their fame pushing them forward. So say they were like, okay, we're not rich from it, but at least it like
gave us other opportunities,
propelled our career like forward. And it's like, no, people didn't believe that. But so, okay, anyway, back to their open letter. The second was meaningful consultation on any future Blair Witch reboot, sequel, prequel, toy, game, ride, etc. that could have them or their likeness associated with it for promotions.
Fair.
Which, like, they crafted the actual characters of this.
Yes.
They made them. So it does make sense that they would be a part of it.
And it's their name.
Yes. And then this one gets me because like anytime you talk about altruism, I cry immediately, but it really did get us. So they wanted to, I'm going to cry when I say it up. They want to create the Blair Witch grant, which would be a $60,000 grant, the budget of the movie, paid out yearly by Lionsgate to an unknown or aspiring filmmaker to assist with their very first film.
I love that.
And they noted that it would be a grant, not a development fund. So Lionsgate would not own any of the rights to the project. So, like, if you ever want to make Amanda and I cry, tell us about a situation where a person had a very unfortunate thing and then they took that to help other people in a way that would not help them. That will always make us cry.
It's so nice.
But I love that they included that. Like, hey, you should pay us what you should have. You should include us like the creators that we are. And just to show how much you've grown, help other people even when it doesn't benefit you.
Yes.
I really like that. And we really hope that Lionsgate makes the right choice and gives the actors what they deserve. And we have it in our show notes, but we have all of the actors' Instagram handles. So if you want to follow them or learn more about them, in a second, I'm going to tell you what they're up to now.
I love them. Their online presence is great.
I do love them. So today, Michael still acts, and he actually has an acting studio that he runs with his wife, Tony, who also has industry experience. Josh is a writer, director, and actor. He's been in a ton of stuff. And Ray, previously known as Heather, has really leaned into her spirituality side. And she has books and she does coaching and classes and stuff like that. If you go to her website, she has like a very long write-up about like her life and what she's gone through and what she's experienced. I just don't think that we can like do her justice by summing it up.
Mm-hmm.
Go read that. Like, she's amazing.
And also she posts a lot of dog pictures. I love it.
So people still do go to Burkittsville for the Blair Witch related activities. There's even tours that you can take to the major filming locations. Unfortunately, the Griggs house that we talked about earlier was taken apart by fans. So they ended up demolishing it for safety reasons. I never understand stealing pieces of a thing that you like because it's just going to go away. I hate it.
It seems like it's a trend, right? Like we talk about it all the time now. Like
yeah,
a horrific thing happens, or scary movie in this instance.
Mm-hmm.
But people are like, I'm going to travel to a place and I'm going to take a piece of the floor. Like, what the fuck? What are you going to do with that? That's so weird.
Exactly. And after the movie premiered, people even stole the sign to Burkittsville. Like, don't do that.
No.
Don't fucking do that. You don't have to like make the area uncomfortable for the locals or inconvenient in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept happening over and over because they were replacing the sign with one that looked like the sign in the movie because it was beautiful and stunning. And of course they did. So they eventually were like, you know what? We're just going to make a new fucking sign. We're going to design it differently so you won't want it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they made it metal so it was harder to steal. Ugh, we can't have anything nice. And the film's release company did pay for the signs, which is good because like it is their fault.
Right? Yeah, this poor little town. It's just like,
I know.
What the fuck is happening here? So I think I already brought it up, but there's been sequels, books, documentaries, fan films, even a video game. I played most of it, but then I heard that the dog might die and I had to stop. We've talked about it many times on the show, but next time I'm in Maryland, Lindsey promised me we're going to Burkittsville.
Yes, I have.
And something that did catch our attention is the area is said to also be haunted, but unfortunately not by the Blair Witch, because remember, she is made up.
Lame.
Sort of. But it is a super old place that was founded in 1824, and the Civil War went through there. So not a witch, but soldiers that some people have seen before.
Yeah.
There are also a few buildings that people say are haunted, and some people swear that visiting the nearby woods, something paranormal happens, or a lot of people visit it to look for something paranormal.
Yeah.
Additionally, about a mile away from Burkittsville is the Appalachian Trail, which we've covered, right?
Just a few times.
Just a few times. And then we brought it up at the beginning because we've already made, our own story. But the Snallygaster has been seen about 15 minutes away from Burkittsville.
Mm-hmm.
And then, last thing, Burkittsville is also home to a gravity-defying road, which we've talked about these before too. And it's said that if you put your car in neutral, it will appear to go uphill.
Interesting.
Yeah, all together. I mean, we've talked about all of these things in different episodes, so I just love that it was like tying everything together, and especially tying it to the Blair Witch in a way. Every episode is about the Blair Witch now.
Always.
And then another thing that I thought about is if you really think about the Blair Witch and how many people for a long time thought the Blair Witch was real and that this actually happened.
Like genuinely, really, truly believed
Yeah.
in not if we just like believe it will happen, but like believed that it was real.
Yes. Perhaps all of the people collectively have created a tulpa in the area.
Wouldn't that be wild?
And I mean, we say that now everything's a tulpa,
Everything's a fucking tulpa.
but everything is now a Blair Witch tulpa.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I just love that. So obviously I've brought it up and I'm going to keep bringing it up forever. The Blair Witch has always been one of my favorite movies, but I didn't know until recently how crazy the filming process was and how poorly the actors were treated. So I have a bigger respect for the movie and the actors and how amazing that they are.
Same.
So we want to know, what did you think of the Blair Witch when you first saw it? Like your thoughts. Did you think it was real? Did you have any weird forest stories like we do?
And also, when you do your rewatch, what do you think about it now?
Yes. Now, do you see it in a different light?
Mm-hmm.
And then also, did you know about the filming? or what the actors are still going through. We'd love you to share with us.
Yeah. And if you would like to rewatch them for free, we've got you. The original movie is on Peacock for free. And then the mockumentary that's like the prequel that has the lore in it that was originally on Sci-Fi is on Amazon Prime streaming for free. And we'll have the links in our show notes. So switching to just a little bit of housekeeping before we scamper off for today. If you're loving the show, we would so appreciate if you would leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. It helps people find us. If you send us a screenshot of your review with your mailing address, we'll send you a sticker. As a little thank you.
Yes.
And with that, have a great spooky season.
Thanks for creeping with us.
Thanks for listening. And as always, a special thank you to our patrons who support us via Patreon.
Please see the link in our show notes to learn more about how you, yes you, can begin to haunt the dump, guard vortexes, or even become a scorching Sasquatch.
Ooh. Also in our show notes, you can find the link to our website, more information on our sources, our social media handles, and our merch store.
We'd love for you to keep creeping with us. So if you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, review, and share the show with your fellow creeps and or ghosts.
I beg of you. Always. I mean, it is always spooky Susan. It's already spooky Susan. Oh, what if we didn't? Nope, that's fire, baby girl. We don't play with fire. Why do you have an insatiable thirst for the fire? Go back to your bed. Tiny Cat's like, ooh, but I would like to burn my face. See that look I'm getting? Go fuck yourself, lady. Go fuck yourself.